smaller town, but that doesn't mean that we're any less passionate about the Mississippi River and what happens on it and how its history is and where we go from here. I'm pleased to be a part of this whole business that we're about, and I'm certainly pleased to be a moderator this morning on what is our final discussion on implementing green infrastructure along the Mississippi River. There are lots of questions about infrastructure, but there's certainly lots of questions about green infrastructure. How can it help our city economies? Doesn't green mean something just more expensive? How can it add jobs, reduce costs, and offer better service? How many mayors in this room have had the experience or yet to have the experience of raising your water rates? If you haven't, it's only a matter of time. Well, there is a better way to manage these issues, a more sustainable, more economical way, and we have two people who are with us this morning to help us in that endeavor. Nancy Stoner, Acting Assistant Administrator for Water at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and Katherine Baer, Senior Director of Clean Water and Water Supply Programs at Americans Rivers. Ladies, we're so pleased that you're here with us. We thank you for taking the time. Both of you will have about 20 minutes. And Ms. Stoner, I know you want to begin because you have a task ahead of you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be here at the formative meeting of this group. As you can imagine, having groups form around river issues and an interest in water and how they are part of our economy is very near and dear to my heart. I'm very familiar with the Great Lakes Cities group that I understand was sort of the inspiration and model of this group, and that's a terrific group. They've accomplished a huge amount. So you guys have some big shoes to fill there in terms of catching up with the Great Lakes folks. But I'm just really pleased that I got to be here right at the inception of this. I'm really looking forward to seeing your platform coming out next spring and to see what you decide to focus on together and how you make this effort grow. So I just want to say that. So this particular week is really Mississippi River Week for me. I just came from the group that is informally known as the Hypoxia Task Force. It's really the Mississippi River and Gulf of Mexico Task Force. And I am the co-chair of that group with Secretary Bill Northey from Iowa. And we met in Des Moines earlier this week, which is why I didn't get here till today for this. We spent a lot of time at Ohio State at a fair of new agricultural products that are coming out to help farmers keep the nutrients in the plants and out of the waters. This is a city group, but cities and farms, rural areas, we're all in it together. So we're focused on the river here. I'm focused, of course, in that group on the watershed. And we have 12 states that are members of that group, all up and down the Mississippi River. But I wanted to make sure you were aware of it. I think the group, which was formed in the 90s, it's been around quite a while, but it really is, I think, taking off. We have every state that's a member of the group preparing a state nutrient reduction strategy. And that's looking at a scientific and analytical assessment of where the nutrients are coming from in that state, what the loads are, how they can be reduced sufficient to meet local water quality objectives. So having drinking water that's safe to drink, having waterways that are safe to swim in, eat fish from, none of the green muck all over the water that you get sometimes with nutrient-enriched waters. So figuring out how to do that for the within basin water waters all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, and making sure that that tremendous resource down there and the fish and shell fishing and tourism industries associated with that are protected. So we expect to have all of those state-level strategies done in 2013. And then we're on to implementation. So, so we're really we're excited about how that work is going, and I'm very excited. I don't know if any of you know Secretary Northey in Iowa, but he's quite a force, and he's just what we need to really get the natural alliance that should work between farmers and water quality people, because we have very similar interests in having strong protection for our waterways, ensuring that there is usable water for agriculture as well as every other use. And so he's going to help us make that work, and so we're very excited about that. So the topic here today, of course, is about river cities and the infrastructure that supports river cities. Before I get to green infrastructure, I just want to talk a minute about infrastructure in general. So how many of you would have a city if you didn't have water and wastewater infrastructure? Please raise your hands. Right, none of you, right? It is totally basic to our society to have water and wastewater infrastructure. And there's a lot of discussion of infrastructure and infrastructure investment. And much to my dismay, water and wastewater appears to be last on a lot of people's lists. They talk about transportation infrastructure, they talk about energy infrastructure, but it's water and wastewater infrastructure that's the foundation. Every business that comes to you and is thinking, should I locate in your city? They want to know, do you have reliable water and sanitation that I am going to have for my business, whatever it is, 365 days a year? So I ask you to join me in getting the word out about water and wastewater infrastructure and what it means to our economy. The problem with it is that it's, taken for granted. It's, it's too, duh is the reaction that you get. That's the problem we have. But we need to bring it up to top of mind, and we need to do that because we need to make sure that we have the resources at every level to do this, whether it's the federal resources, the state resources, whether you're able to raise the rates, which I know is a very difficult thing for elected officials when you need to do that in order to ensure that you have adequate water and wastewater infrastructure. So I ask you to join me in talking about the importance of that infrastructure. So it's obvious. What is it for? It's protecting public health. It's protecting the environment. That's what it's for. We all know what it's for. So let me just talk a moment about the jobs and the economic impact associated with it. The U.S. Conference of Mayors found that every job created in water infrastructure creates 3 additional jobs to support that position. The American Public Works Association estimated that for every $1 billion invested in water infrastructure construction, more than 40,000 jobs are created. There was a report recently, last year, from a group called Green for All, which found that investment of $188 billion over the next 5 years would generate $265 billion in economic activity and close to 1.9 million jobs. So it's a good time right now to invest in tackling our water infrastructure investment gap. Another report that I find pretty compelling is one from the American Society of Civil Engineers. They did a report last year. This is what happens if we don't invest in water and wastewater infrastructure. They found that by 2020, the U.S. will have fallen $84 billion short of the investments needed in our critical water systems. And what that comes with is $59 billion in increased costs to households, $147 billion in increased costs to businesses, $416 billion in lost gross domestic product, and the loss of 700,000 jobs. So this is an investment that makes sense for our society, and it has tremendous costs if we fail to do that. That being said, what we're seeing on the federal level is continued cuts to the principal source of infrastructure funding that we have, the Clean Water and Safe Drinking Water state revolving funds. How many of you use the state revolving funds? Okay. The FY13 House Appropriation Committee markup proposal to fund clean water and drinking water SRF at $1.518 billion would result in a 25% reduction from the President's budget request of just over $2 billion. It's estimated that this reduction in federal funding would result in approximately 210 fewer projects, fewer wastewater and water infrastructure projects. So already some of you don't have projects. There'll be fewer of those next year. And then that would lead to approximately 7,900 to 14,600 fewer jobs. So that's difficult. It's difficult to continue to support the funding at the federal level. The states, of course, have very difficult times supporting that funding as well. And we're continuing to do the best we can at the EPA and in the federal budget to support that. We have put approximately $18 billion into water and wastewater infrastructure since 2009. On to green infrastructure. So EPA strongly supports the use of green infrastructure. So Colin said he wanted me to talk with you about why. So why is it that we like green infrastructure? Well, it's really because it's multifunctional, multi-benefit, because it can help revitalize cities. It can really help strengthen waterfront development. It can really help not only clean the water, but clean the air, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce urban heat island effect. It's because it has so many benefits. That being said, we don't think that green infrastructure in most places, maybe none, can totally replace the gray infrastructure. It's a question of complementing the gray infrastructure, the pipes, the pumps, the sewage treatment plants, with the green infrastructure that offloads the storm water, the sewer, offloads that from those structures. Well, actually, offloads the storm water so you don't have the sewer overflow. What I said didn't make any sense. Offloads the storm water so that when you have combined pipes, as you do in a combined system, the sewage all reaches the treatment plant. And then when you have separate storm sewer pipes, you have less flow through there. The flow through the sewer pipes is what carries all the contaminants from the surface of the land into the waterways. It also causes those high volume, high velocity flows, those flashy flows that come from rain events. You see the water rushing down the streets into the pipes, rushing out, scours the streams, causes trees to fall in, stream bank erosion, all those kinds of things. So you get toxic contaminants, you get loss of habitat, you get less oxygen in the water for fish to breathe. All of those things are associated with that stormwater pollution. And then, as I said, in the combined systems, and sometimes even in the separate systems, when you have too much infiltration inflow, green infrastructure can keep those waters, storm waters out. They also can be captured and reused in a lot of cases, particularly for non-potable uses, for irrigation, for things like flushing toilets, if you have the piping associated with that. We, treat to tap water quality all the water that we use for almost every purpose in the United States. That trend is starting to change. We're seeing more and more reclaimed water, reused water, particularly for things like parks and golf courses and irrigation and that kind of thing. People are doing that in their homes with rain barrels, with cisterns and so forth. All of that can be a system that treats the water closer to home, doesn't provide treatment for water that we don't need, puts the water back into the ground where it recharges the base flow, where it eventually reaches the groundwater, supports having more groundwater drinking water supplies in the future. It's a more sustainable system. It's also a more stable system. Has more redundancy in it, which sounds like a bad thing, but is actually a good thing in this context. You don't have as many catastrophic failures. You have trees there, grass there, plants there that can soak up the water and make it more beautiful and more functional. So those are the reasons we like it. And I got to tell you, I'm finding that I'm not the only one who likes it. We have lots of people who are asking for our assistance in designing green infrastructure programs for their communities, who are trying to figure out what it will do for them. We have really good data on what it will do on a site level, what it will do to have a rain garden, what it will do to have permeable pavement, what it will do to have rain barrels. But when you scale up to the sewer shed or to the sub-watershed size, we're just getting there now. We're just getting there to start being able to aggregate and to say, this is what this will accomplish for our community. And we're trying to help people to figure out those kinds of things. So one of the things that we're doing is providing technical assistance to communities as much as we can. Helping them with the development of models, with the monitoring plan, with the designs. We can't pay for all the infrastructure. We don't have the money to do that, but we can help you figure out what's the best strategy for you, what's the best design, and it can mesh. It really can mesh with your community goals. That's one of the things that's so beautiful about it. So we heard last night about the arch and the plan with the arch and so forth. Not everybody has an arch. Sounds like everybody would like to have an arch. but whatever you do have, you have a waterfront. That's why you're here. You have a waterfront that you love, that's part of your community. What's your design? Do you want to have bike paths? Do you want to have an arbor? Do you want to have a park? Do you want to have buildings that have permeable pavement and have rainwater capture as a part of those? Green infrastructure can be part of what your community wants, that will be your signature, and will also provide all these water, wastewater, and other environmental benefits. So we're doing the best we can to help meet the demand, and it is out there. So last year we did out of headquarters. We did some technical assistance. That was about $1 million. Every one of our regions has money. They do technical assistance. They have some partner communities that they're working with. If you're not one yet, tell them you want to be one. You want to get in there. You want to be part of it, and we're going to do the best we can to meet that demand. The $1 million we did technical assistance out of Washington. I think the only Mississippi River community that we reached there was La Crosse. Do we have La Crosse here?
They're a member.
Yeah, not here. Okay, so next time I want to come back and say all of you are also on the list, and that we're working together on this, on figuring out how to do that. Now, St. Louis has a green infrastructure program. St. Louis is committed to spend $100 million on green infrastructure. And the goal, as I understand it, is to reduce discharges to the Mississippi River from the combined sewer areas by 10%. That's about what most communities can do. Most communities cannot do 50%. It's more like 10 to 20%. So it is a complement to the gray infrastructure sewer system that you have, but it can be a complement that can really work for you. Another thing we're doing that I'd like you to know about, because it's right now, is something called a Campus Rainworks competition. It's a design competition for college campuses. If you have colleges within your town, now's the time to sign up. We opened up the sign up on September 4. The entries have to be submitted by December 14, so it's just designed to match up with the college semester. And it's to design a green infrastructure project for that campus. So we get the students involved, we get the faculty involved, we get these sites on the campuses where everybody can see them, and hopefully these students will go on to do more of that in the future. We have cash prizes for both the students and for the faculty for doing that, and we'll be announcing the winners in April. We of course have a board to select the best designs. We're hoping to do this next year and not just jury the designs, but also the implementation. So we need to come up with a little more money to do that, but we'd like to have implementation, and then we can go look at all of these, and I'm really looking forward to that. Let me mention one more thing, and then I should probably take your questions and wrap up. And so that's something called the Integrated Planning Framework. That is a joint effort of my office, the Office of Water, and the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance at EPA, Cynthia Giles' office. And it was announced in June. It's a framework to help local governments manage stormwater runoff and wastewater. It assists EPA regional offices, states, and local governments to develop voluntary storm and wastewater management plans and implement effective integrated approaches that will protect public health by reducing overflows from wastewater systems and pollution from stormwater. So I wanted to read that because I wanted to make sure that I gave you the sort of the official, here's exactly what it is, but let me explain to you what my understanding is. So the issue is, in communities, you have both wastewater issues, you have stormwater issues, often you have overflow issues, you have treatment level issues, all those kinds of things. And many communities are already doing the planning together for all of those things, the capital budgeting for all those things, the prioritization for all those kinds of things. Other communities haven't done that yet, but we think that's a good practice. And sometimes we, and EPA and our state partners, have sometimes not been that receptive to looking at the broad picture. So, you know, they've got an issue, it's a permit for addressing discharges from a particular sewage treatment plant. They're focused on that. But what's the big picture? What are the investments that are going to really work for this community, given the tight funding that I started with at the beginning? How to prioritize? What are the things that need to be done first? What are the things that can be put off, maybe never done, depending on how things look 10 or 20 years from now, because a lot of these capital budgets are 10 or 20 years or longer. We need to put first things first. We need to make sure every dollar is spent as effectively as possible. That's what this is about. It's about integrating those things and making sure that every dollar counts the best. This is open to everyone. If you're a community that has a consent decree already, that's okay. You can still talk to the regional office, to your state permitting authority. If you are in an enforcement action, it's okay. Doors open to you. Come on in. Talk about how this might be something you'd like to consider in the settlement of that action. If you're one of the fortunate people that isn't in category 1 or 2, come on in with your next permit that you're getting. You're probably getting a stormwater permit, a wastewater permit. How could I integrate those two? How could I look at those things together? How could we work together to spend every dollar better and achieve more? So that's what that effort is. And the regional offices for EPA are taking the lead on working with the states. The states, of course, are the permitting authorities in 46 states. So you're going to be talking to, and I'm thinking it's all of you. There isn't, we don't do any permits, I don't think, along the Mississippi River. So you need to talk to your state, you need to talk to your regional office, but this is something that can help spread out your costs and increase the environmental benefits that you get for your investments. That's what we're trying to make happen. All right, I'm going to stop right there and see what questions you have for me.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've given us all much to think about and probably raise some questions, so we'll take those right now. Yes.
Great talk, Nancy. I like your enthusiasm, and somebody's out there really helping out the environment. Davenport's probably typical of a lot of cities, so my question might be similar. We're doing a lot, could do more, but they're just stormwater runoff. Our standards are probably 50, 60 dated type, where like it's 1.5 inches of rainwater at any given time. I'm probably not explaining it right. That the developers has to be able to cover that. And now we're getting these 2- and 3-inch rains immediately. Example, one of the higher points in the city, it's only 2.7 acres. We're going through the zoning right now as we speak. It's in its 3rd reading, all surrounded by shopping malls, shopping centers built back in the 60s, 70s. No real concern about runoff as it should be. So where do we go from here? We've got to approve a plan next time. The developer is open to doing it better, doing it at a higher standard. I'm not sure the old traditional consulting engineers who work with them are up to speed or doing as cutting edge stuff as they should. Maybe they are. But could EPA or someone come in and sit down like immediately with the developer, his engineers, our city staff, and say, wait a minute, you got this 2.7, it's the last area, you could do it this and that and the other thing, and that will provide your 2.5% runoff or something. Is that, I mean, it's great to have it out in Kansas City or in Des Moines, but this is right up front now.
So one thing is that we have tools that can help you to do that, that will help figure out what the runoff would be from that particular site if you put in particular kinds of green infrastructure investments. But it may also be, based on what you're describing, that it can't be done on that particular site because they're at the top of the hill, and so where they may not be able to do it all right there. And you've got all these parking lots, all this other area around there that is doing nothing. Matter of fact, what they're doing is creating stormwater. And so sometimes communities often use off-site mitigation or fee in lieu approaches to get others who have done nothing so far to do things as well. So there are different ways of doing that. I could give you somebody in my office that you could call to find out what the options are.
And I don't want to dominate, but there is an area a block away that's basically a big hole. It's, you know, highways go by it. It's never been recognized as much, but it should hold water.
Yep.
But someone needs to come in and say, oh, we've done this elsewhere, engineer. Why don't you just do this, that, and the other thing? This, that, and the other thing won't get done because the developer, it costs money. The city probably half smart in this, or maybe they're pretty good. But that's like on the spot right now, or that's done. We're going to approve the thing, going to have X number of units per acre because that's the standard. He meets the basic standard. We need standards, it seems to me, that are site-specific as applied to a whole city. You know, what could be built over here surrounded by farm ground is much different than when you have a site here that's surrounded by concrete. But our standards are like 1.25 for everything.
Yeah, but that is because of the idea that off-site mitigation can be used when it's not feasible to do it on the site. That is the reason that you have a uniform standard. It's really to deal with some of those places where they haven't done anything yet, as well as to make sure that that particular site is doing as much as it can. But I'll give you a card, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with someone who could let you know what tools we have and so forth that your engineers could take a look at right now to work on that.
Are there any other questions?
You have one right here, ma'am.
Okay.
Yep.
We're in a little different situation in Davenport. We've already entered into a consent decree with the state. It's going to cost us $100 million to do our CSO and stormwater runoff, plus a $49 million sewer treatment plant. We've, for the last about 5 years, wanted to visit Washington, and we're always asking for money for the unfunded mandates that we've been forced into. And so now our new consulting engineer talked about the green concept of trying to possibly, you know, the stormwater runoff of not necessarily having it all running into our sewer system. So I also would be interested in what the EPA has to offer, because it's always been, we're told to do something, but there's never really been a good, you know, you can't always afford it in a small town, 26,000 people, you know, $150 million is an awful lot of money.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons that we did this integrated planning approach is because we were hearing from a lot of communities that they were having trouble affording what they were doing now, but even more so that they were having trouble affording what they were doing now and they needed to do more, that there were other things they hadn't even gotten to yet that they needed to do as well. And so I'm not saying that, that this is a panacea for you, but it can at least help you to do a little better reconciling of what the needs are with your resources. And would be happy to do that. I'm sorry, what city did you say you're from? Iowa. Okay, so that's Region 7. Karen Flournoy would be our Water Division Director there. She'd be the right person to talk with. Okay?
EPA did have the targeted watershed program, grant program, right? And it was last funded in 6?
Yeah, we don't have that anymore. We do have 319 funds for non-point source. We do have the SRF that I talked with earlier. Both of those can be used for stormwater investments. We have a little bit of money for some urban waterways projects and so forth, but there are other sources of funding as well. One of the things that we can help you to do, some communities have gotten DOT to fund things, they've gotten HUD to fund things, they've gotten USDA has an urban forestry program. That's a good place to go for green infrastructure dollars. So it isn't just out of EPA. It's part of the key is to put those funding sources together.
Well, the non-point source runoff, I think I'm thinking about agricultural runoff in our area, which is our Chief White was pointing out the other day that soil conservation can help with that to get that nutrient-rich water into areas and keep it out of the ditches. Would soil conservation not be a source that might help him with his storm runoff?
Well, another thing that people do is protecting and enhancing that upstream watershed. That's exactly your point. So forests. If you have upstream forests, you're going to have a lot less a stormwater problem in your city if you can get some of that water captured before it reaches the city as well, and then have those forested areas within the city where you have room. In response to your comment, I was thinking about vacant lots. A lot of communities that have vacant lots, they've turned them into stormwater meadows. It's really a question of what space you have to work with, what your design is, but there's lots of places in the landscape that can and do hold water and reduce those pollutants. If you can get the water to soak through even a few inches of soil, you'll get most of the contaminants out, and instead what you've got is recharged subsurface flows and groundwater. So it's just a question of getting people who know how to do these designs for you, and there's an increasing number of them across the country.
Anybody else? I think you have to catch a plane.
I do. I'm sorry I can't talk with you longer, and I wish I had been here yesterday to hear all about what you're doing in your communities, but I wish you well, and I look forward to seeing your platform in March. Thanks.
Thank you very much for being here.
And you're in good hands with Katherine. She knows everything that I know plus more, so any question I didn't get to, ask Katherine.
Oh, are you ready for that? Are you ready for that?
Oh, boy, I think we should lower expectations.
I think she just raised them for you. Thank you again.
Okay,
Safe
thanks.
trip. Okay, Katherine?
All right. Well, great. Good introduction. Thank you. I am also just really so pleased to be here and excited about your initiative. And when Colin first called me, it just seemed like such a great opportunity to work with you all. So before I really get started, I want to tell you all a very quick story. Because I am from our North Carolina office. I live in North Carolina and the Durham, Chapel Hill area. But when I was getting ready to come here, I was sort of looking through the materials and trying to find out who I might meet and so forth. And so I looked at my panel and saw that Mayor Smiley was the moderator. And so I went to her website to find out where exactly Clarksville is and what she does. And I started reading her bio. And you probably all know that she's an accomplished musician and was a longtime music teacher. And all of a sudden, her name sort of started sounding familiar to me. And I'm not a musician. But my husband, who is from Connecticut, spent 3 years in high school when his father got transferred to St. Louis at Ladue. And I emailed him and I said, "Do you know Mayor Smiley?" He goes, "Oh, Mrs. Smiley? Oh my gosh, yes, of course, I love Mayor, Mrs. Smiley." And so it turns out that you were the teacher, I think, inspiration for my husband and as his career unfolds. So this is a poster. So this is from the early 80s, and my husband is somewhere in there. I'm not going to tell you which one he is, but. So I just.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you were much appreciated around the country.
My children. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so this was great.
Oh my gosh.
So I work for American Rivers in our clean water program, and as I said, I'm from North Carolina now. I'm not in the Mississippi Basin, but I would tell you that I was born in Memphis. And although we moved out of Memphis soon after I was born, my grandmother lived there, and so I actually grew up visiting her and going to Mud Island. And if those of you who've been there, there has a model of the whole Mississippi where you can essentially walk the watershed, the river basin, in the museum and step over the different tributaries. And it's really such a fun place for a kid, but I always remember that and sort of thinking about the whole basin scale and how important it is. And later, my sister lived in St. Paul for a number of years, and so one year we did the camping trip where we went up to the headwaters of the Mississippi. And so, although I'm not from your region, I definitely feel a connection and understanding of how important the rivers are in this area. So at American Rivers, we are a national nonprofit environmental advocacy group, and our broad mission is to protect and restore the nation's rivers. And as someone pointed out last night, it's a very broad mission that can be interpreted a lot of different ways. And so we're a relatively small group. We have 80 people around the country, and so we sort of pick some targeted areas to work in, both on the ground and on the policy level. And in the Mississippi Basin, we actually have only one person up in La Crosse. But we do work in partnership with the Mississippi River Network and other partners across the basin, and so that's generally how we work, is in partnership with other environmental organizations, local communities, water utilities, and so forth, to try to accomplish our mission to make sure that rivers have enough clean and abundant water for both people and wildlife really moving into the future. And so kind of to follow on Nancy, so when we at American Rivers think about green infrastructure, we think the whole suite of practices from the river basin to the local scale. And so essentially thinking of it as a functional definition, how do we make the natural and built environment function more naturally? So how do we protect, restore, and replicate natural function? And so I think yesterday there was discussions about sort of the floodplain, the river basin scale, which some of my colleagues work in. And of course today I'm talking about on the community level and how we might integrate some of these green infrastructure practices in cities and towns across the country. And so when Colin told me we were not going to use PowerPoint, and I know that's a good thing because we all use it as a crutch, so it's good. But of course I was like, okay, it's nice to see a picture of the trees, so I just want you to think about trees and green things as I'm talking, and it'll give you the visual of what I might have shown. I did bring a couple of handouts, so I'm going to send these around, and they are just 3 fact sheets we have that I'm going to sort of touch on through the talk, and so you're welcome to look at them now or take them later, and the full information is on our website. So you mind that? Thanks. So, and just to tell you how we sort of came to this work, so our clean water program, there's a lot of aspects to clean water, but we started working actually in the Great Lakes on low impact development in Grand Rapids and a couple other places, and sort of basically really on the ground, hey, helping communities put in rain gardens, and this was 10 to 12 years ago when honestly, people hadn't really heard that much about green infrastructure and low impact development. And since that time, we've sort of just hit this curve of things. Is now, the field, both from the practitioner side, the engineering side, has really blossomed. And so if you think that you go to conferences now, and where in the past engineers weren't that familiar with green infrastructure, and now it's becoming very much more accepted and common practice. And we have practitioners out there just really leading the way on how we integrate green infrastructure into our cities. So our thinking really is, and we work on projects but also on policy, and when we started working a lot on infrastructure funding and recognizing, like Nancy said, how critical it is to have infrastructure funding for our water systems around the country. And so we worked a lot on that on the federal level, essentially lobbying and building support for those funds that then go out to states and communities around the country. And so we know the gap is there, right? And so here's what I think, our basic thinking on green infrastructure is that we know the infrastructure's gap is there, and we have crumbling infrastructure that has to be fixed. Essentially, at some point, some level is going to have to invest in this infrastructure, right? We're going to have to figure out how that's done, and we can sort of argue about where it should come from. But we think also that it's so critical that we invest in the right things moving forward, because especially in this time when we're economically constrained, trying to invest in things that are sustainable, that will last, that are cost effective, and provide multiple benefits is really key. And so we think broadly about clean water for our rivers, but also livability for our communities, and really envision those together as healthy communities and rivers really going together. The other thing that I just think is really interesting, this fact always sort of gets me, is that in between now and 2030, almost half of the land considered urban will be redeveloped. And so obviously that will vary in each community how much that is. But that is an opportunity, right? As we redevelop, anytime we do something, we should be thinking about what's the best thing we can do for water, our water systems, and how do we add that in the process. And that's, not always the case. So I think, we have a problem, but also a major opportunity moving forward. So I want to talk about two specific things. One are the sort of the tangible benefits of green infrastructure in a little more detail than Nancy had time to get into, including cost effectiveness. And then secondly, sort of ways to possibly incentivize and fund green infrastructure across the country and in communities. So I'm first going to talk about the benefits, and the first fact sheet, it refers to this report that we did in collaboration with the Water Environment Federation, the Association of Landscape Architects, and Eco Northwest, who's an economic consulting firm. And so it's long and fairly dense, and the fact sheet gives you an overview, but it's been really helpful in terms of demonstrating and pulling together a lot of information about what are the benefits of green infrastructure, because there are ongoing questions. As anything that's new, right, it takes a while to get the information you need to sort of make the case for it. So this covers energy efficiency, cost effectiveness, flooding, and public health. I'm going to try to cover 3 of those, and we'll just note too that the really great thing about green infrastructure is, this covers 4 categories of benefits. There are many more, and Nancy alluded to some of them. So reduced improved air quality, reduced temperatures in urban areas, increased green space, public health, a lot of different things that we don't necessarily talk about. So this, in a way, is sort of the tip of the iceberg. And so, we get here, and then there's only more we can count on. And I think the thing we feel it's really important is that being able to quantify and demonstrate some of these benefits is important, because these are real benefits that accrue to either individuals at the site level, developers, and or the community. And so from that perspective, trying to get them into the policy debate through the valuation procedures as communities make decisions is really important, and really can shift the way we think about infrastructure investment and other sorts of investments. Okay, so first, cost effectiveness, and I know this is one that people are really always interested in. On the most basic level, on a site level, there's a lot of data now about how green infrastructure is effective in reducing contaminants. And then you look at cost effectiveness, also increasing data showing that it is. And so by treating water on site and keeping it either out of the sewage system or out of the streams, or reduce the flooding off-site, you're essentially reducing the treatment costs that someone else has to bear. And whether that's the developer, the neighborhood association, the municipality, the utility, it can vary. But that's why, on a per unit basis, often green infrastructure is more cost effective. Now, there are some certain practices that have a higher upfront cost. So green roofs, for example, are more expensive than a traditional roof. And so that's what we try to look at the full life cycle cost and try to figure out, well, okay, if it's more expensive now, but what benefits are you getting over time that might change that equation? So that's why we start with cost effectiveness, but then also look at the multiple benefits. So you're trying to both improve cost effectiveness and increase benefits, so both sides of that equation. So for cost effectiveness, I sort of think about it in 2 scales. There's a site scale, you might affect a developer, and then there's the community scale. So on a site level, there's just a couple of examples. Subdivisions have found that they've actually saved money, the developers saved money by using green infrastructure practices. And this is because they're not having to spend as much money on what would be the hard traditional conveyance systems, piping systems, and they don't have to build sort of the regional big detention ponds that take a lot of space. So in Boulder Hills, New Hampshire, for example, the developer decided to use green infrastructure to reduce stormwater. They reduced their overall cost by 6% and generated additional lots that they could then sell, so added to their bottom line. A big box store, also New Hampshire, reduced their overall cost by 10%, or $1 million, using permeable pavement in a constructed wetland. And so, those are fairly substantial costs for a developer, and you can imagine sort of if you add those up over a whole development community, it can be quite a lot. Another practice of green infrastructure is using, when you reconstruct streets, of course, is making a green street and trying to reduce the stormwater runoff and use trees, street trees, and rain gardens and so forth. So Seattle has done a lot of that, as have a number of cities around the country. And they found that when they sort of turned their streets into green streets, they reduced their hard material construction costs by almost half. So again, quite a big savings, and if you're looking at having to build a lot of streets. And the other thing was they got multiple benefits of they had wanted to create more shade and more walkability, and so they were able to do that at the same time. So there's the site scale, and so if you look at, if you want to look further in the Banking on Green and other publications, there's more examples of how it can be cost effective at the site scale. At the municipal level, it's you basically are scaling it up, and so you sometimes have to think, well, who's going to actually receive the benefit? If the developer has to put in a green roof and they don't receive the benefit, are there big enough savings or benefits to the whole community that it makes sense to go ahead and do that and incentivize it as a program, because then you're going to see the benefits for the community and make it even out for the developer. So the best examples on the cost-saving side on the municipal level right now come from the communities that have combined sewer overflows, and that's for the reason that they're the ones with really big costs right now and have tried to sort of use the Clean Water Act as a way to push innovation. And I really like that idea because often, although there are complaints about the regulatory system, having a goal makes people get creative about how they're cost-effectively going to meet that. And so we've actually seen that. And so I'm just curious, I don't repeat things. Are people here familiar with the example from Philadelphia? Okay, good. We talk about that a lot, and it's like one of the best comprehensive examples. So it's a nice story. So Philadelphia, like many communities, has a combined sewer overflow, and they were looking at big investment to try to reduce it and get it down to their compliance levels for clean water. And they essentially, the mayor said, okay, we can't spend this much money. How can we do this more cheaply? And so they looked at analysis of what were the different alternatives they could use in a city. And as you know, Philadelphia is urban. It's densely urban, and there's not, a lot of room for doing new development and sort of greener thing. It's a very urban area. And so when they looked at it, they developed a $1 billion plan to manage their CSOs. But instead of investing it all in a deep tunnel project, which is the typical way in the sort of over the past 20 years we've developed for managing CSOs, they decided to spend $200 million to restore and preserve stream corridors, $200 million to upgrade treatment plants, and $600 million to basically green a third of their watershed that contributed to their sewer overflows. And that was included parking lots, swales, rain gardens, green roofs, permeable pavement, the whole suite of practices that way. And at its base, that decision was a cost-effective one. It was cheaper for them to achieve their CSO goals by doing this green-gray approach as opposed to going all gray. But then additionally, the city took it to the next level, and they said, well, okay, so we know it's cheaper on the cost side. What about the benefit side? And they hired a firm to do what's called triple bottom line assessment, looking at the social, cultural, economic, environmental benefits to the city over sort of the next 50 years. And so they found across the board, the green plan just had a much higher benefit than the traditional gray plan. So for example, recreation, they were going to have 247 million additional recreational user days because part of the plan was creating more parks that also served as stormwater runoff areas. Electricity savings from all the trees, fewer heat-related fatalities, and that was very interesting for cities that are getting hotter in many places. What are we going to do about these heat-related problems? Creation of green-collar jobs, reduction of carbon dioxide emissions, and so across the board, it was sort of both sides were on the balance sheet, came out really right, and so they have fully embraced that going forward. They have approval from the state, from EPA, and it's very exciting. So what they are doing now is sort of then working to align their policies with that plan. And so by having an on-site retention standard, a stormwater fee, a streamlined permitting for green projects, tax credits. And I think that's really the key and exciting thing is what do you do when you decide to go this route to then align the funding, the financing, and the policies so you're going to try to get these results. And I think, that's where you all are really just, doing the most innovation and finding out how these things really work together. So that's Philadelphia. Other communities, New York City is supposed to save $1.5 billion over the next 20 years by using a green infrastructure to complement their traditional hard infrastructure. Nancy talked about St. Louis. There's a number of cities like that who are sort of just beginning, doing demonstration projects, trying to figure out how this is going to work in the best way. And a story from a city where we work, we have an office in Toledo, and a woman who runs our office there and has done a lot of green infrastructure work. And we partnered with Toledo. They got a grant from the stimulus money. It was about $850 million, I think. No, that sounds high. Anyways, the project is to basically green out an area. It's called the Maywood neighborhood that has been afflicted by flood problems for a long time, and also was within the city's combined sewer overflow area. And so the city was interested in trying to reduce stormwater there. So they spent the money there to take out the area between the street and the sidewalk, green that, put in rain gardens, do a number of different practices. And so the consultants who's running the project, they've been monitored it and come out with the results, and they found out basically, based on these results, Toledo right now has a long-term control plan, and they're planning an expansion of their tunnel under the city that's supposed to cost $22 million. So for the same amount of capture, they could spend $6.6 million and do it with green infrastructure. Now, I don't know if they will, because I think, like you're saying, they're already in a long-term control plan. They'd have to go back and change it. We're hoping they will, but it just shows the opportunity there once we can sort of get the data and put it into these processes. And in the meantime, that neighborhood, the residents love it, because in the last flood, they had 7 inches, and they didn't get any basement flooding in that neighborhood. So even though, it won't take care of everything. In extreme storms, we're seeing that people are liking this because they're seeing the benefits, and I think that's really nice. Okay, so that's sort of cost effectiveness in a general way. And the second category to look at is flooding, and I think this is something you all really talked about yesterday. And so when we think about flooding and municipal green infrastructure, we're obviously looking at a different scale, the sort of nesting scale within the bigger basin. And clearly we have to do flood control at a number of different levels to make that work. But the changes we've seen in urban areas, from urban sprawl and the increase in parking lots, roads, impervious surfaces, really contributes and exacerbates these larger floods. And so anything we can do in urban areas to reduce those helps keep our local communities safe from flooding and nuisance flooding, and reduces property damages, as well as contributing to these larger storms, which keep on coming. And the other thing is the economic impacts of flooding in urban areas. I mean, you all know this firsthand, but FEMA has estimated that 25% of the overall economic losses resulting from floods are from these urban drainage problems, not major floodplain areas. And so, and Nancy talked about, we actually did an interesting polling project a couple years ago trying to figure out, well, do people know what stormwater is? And, largely people don't care. And so, but what they did get was that when a local covered bridge, as was someone in Pennsylvania, when that caved in, or when the local sort of cultural amenity historic site fell in, people were like, oh, I think that's because they could see the link to development. And so there is, I think, interesting way to talk about flooding, stormwater, and our sort of community identity together that gets people more excited about trying to make some changes. So the other thing is that recent research, definitely green infrastructure in cities is effective at reducing the sort of the smaller storms that are the most frequent ones. I mean, that's what we have still the most of. But recent research actually in Illinois modeled out a watershed and showed that even these larger storms, the 50 and 100-year storms, the green infrastructure can actually work to reduce those by about 25 and 22%. And so they're starting to show data that these will have an impact on the storm. So they're sort of even adding to the argument of why you might want to use it at these scales. So one example, and I think it's in that fact sheet, is from St. Paul, Minnesota, and the watershed district there was looking to clean up a lake, but really they were driven by these localized flooding problems, which apparently were really bad. It was a highly impervious watershed. And so they, again, compared the different plans. They could do traditional flood storage, which didn't have much of a water quality benefit, or they could take the green infrastructure plan. They selected the green one, and it proved to be a really excellent choice, reducing, let's see, saving $1 million, and that was a 45% cost reduction compared to their original plan. So that was great, and then also really effective at reducing, I think it was total suspended solids and phosphorus, which was some of their constituents of concern. In the La Crosse, which Nancy talked more people trying to figure out how we effectively use green infrastructure to reduce flooding, like how do you site things to make that work. Third benefit category I want to touch on, because it is like a big economic impact for people in most places, is energy efficiency and savings. And water and energy, as you guys know, are just very, very combined, even though if we don't always manage them that way. And so our report focuses on the energy savings from green infrastructure, mostly from green roofs, street trees, and then the avoided cost of moving water around, which nationally is a huge number. And so anything we can do to keep water on site, treat it there, not have to move it around, is a cost savings for someone somewhere. So green roofs, you probably know, right, they provide more insulation, so you don't, as a building owner, you don't spend as much on heating and cooling costs. The other thing is you don't see the real extreme swings, so your roof gets, maybe goes up temperature this way, and then in the winter goes this way as opposed to going up here. That extends the lifespan of the roof. So you have roofs that theoretically are going to last longer, lower the replacement cost. So that can be really good in terms of saving both money and your heating, cooling costs on an annual basis. Trees on the site will help buffer a building, reducing the amount of money you have to spend on heating when it comes from the wind, cooling from the wind. And then in terms of avoided costs, so nationally it's estimated that about 13% of energy is used to pump, treat, and move water around. That's a lot of energy. It's a lot of money, and it will vary, of course, depending on whether you're California or Alabama. But that's something that really should be considered. If you're somewhere, you're a place where you're moving your water around a lot. So on the high side of that, there was a study in Southern California, which was fascinating. They looked at modeled out if you use green infrastructure in Los Angeles County as a way to recharge groundwater to increase your local supplies, that would save electricity use of 65,000 households because they move their water so far away in California. So that's the really high side of sort of the energy water savings, and you see it less so in other places. But again, interesting sort of just to put out there to think there's a real connection there on the water and energy side. Some specific numbers, the Target Center in Minneapolis, they've got 113,000 square foot green roof. This roof captures 1 million gallons of stormwater a year, so it saves them on their stormwater fees, and it's expected to cut the annual energy cost by $300,000. So I don't know, that seems like a lot to me. I guess it depends what your budget is, but it sounds good. In Chicago, the FedEx sorting facility also has a big green roof, and they're expecting to save $35,000 in energy costs. So there's a good economic reason for to consider that, as well as the community impacts of reducing energy efficiency. And on the combined sewer side, anything that we're reducing energy going into the system, reducing water going into the system, reduce the treatment cost. So I don't have numbers on that, but you can sort of see how that would work and why you'd want to reduce the water coming in to reduce those costs. So that's sort of a quick overview of the benefits. I just wanted to give you a sense of what was out there. I mean, we're seeing, I feel like every day something new comes out about some of the different ways we're quantifying the benefits of this. And there's studies showing, reduced crimes in an area with green infrastructure, improved health because you've improved physical fitness. So really a dynamic benefit pool looking at these approaches, which I think really speaks in its favor. Okay, so to wrap up, I want to talk about the sort of funding finance policy side of this, because obviously we're an advocacy group, so we think a lot about, well, how do we start to scale these approaches up? How would you use them in a city or a state or on the federal level to make them, and like Nancy said, it's not a silver bullet, but like how do we make them a more regular part of the analysis and catalyze the use so it makes it a more normal approach that can be more effective. And I know you're thinking about your platform coming up, and so perhaps some of these ideas will inspire you to think about some of these different things. So one thing I want to follow up on what Nancy started on the state revolving loan fund. This is the major source of water infrastructure coming from the feds to the states and then to local communities. And it sounds like people use it variously. There's a really exciting change in starting with the stimulus money in 2009. There's a fact sheet in the back of this where there was a recognition that, hey, we need to catalyze the use of the SRF, which seems to be declining, into more sort of innovative uses. And so starting then, there was a dedicated funding pool for green infrastructure, water efficiency, and energy efficiency. Of 20%, it's now down at 10% in subsequent appropriations. So since 2009, we've seen about $2.5 billion gone out to communities for projects like urban trees, green roofs, a lot of energy efficiency projects, water reuse. So I want to let you guys know that that money is there. It continues in the budget today. And so far the demand for it has been very high, even as it's moved from a grant to a loan program. And so I think trying to figure out how to set up systems so your cities can use that, access and use that money, and it usually takes a partnership to figure out, have a utility borrow the money and then you pay it back with a stormwater fee, and trying to think about those creative mechanisms. And so I think, we really have felt that in recent years that as people, a lot of the infrastructure groups have started thinking about new ways to fund infrastructure, which is going to be critical. And so whether it's an infrastructure bank or some other mechanism, we still have the state revolving funds. They're there. They're going to continue passing the budget. And so, making sure that there's support for the SRF and specifically for actually funding some of these really innovative approaches that can help cities, I think is really, really key. A second thing we talk about and work with some communities on are the local fee and credit systems. And I say that with a smile because we're in St. Louis, where obviously they can't do a fee and credit system, and there's legal battles about stormwater utility fees. But still, around the country, some places where this is where you live, but there's almost 700 stormwater utilities around the country right now. And they generally work by charging residents a fee related to how much impervious area they have, because that's how much pollution I would be contributing to my local stream that then someone has to clean up. And so this is sort of varied across the country. So these fees, but what we're seeing is sort of the future of how these work is that you can have a fee system then with a credit for keeping water on site. So you're able to reduce it. Now some places are very specific, you have to use XYZ practices. Other places are just keep it on site, and if you do that, you don't have to pay the fee, or you have to just pay part of the fee, as a way to incentivize the use of people doing green infrastructure practices. So Milwaukee is a place where we worked with the business community there to try to educate people about how that works. Philadelphia and Nashville are a couple other places that's doing. And what's interesting, though, is as we look forward, well, what are the other funding sources we can bring to the table to try to help our infrastructure systems? In Philadelphia, they modeled out and said that with the stormwater fee, it actually created an investment opportunity for private investors, for the private sector to come in of almost $400 million. So say they looked across the city and said, well, you're going to make this differential of whatever, $1,000 per site. We'll come in, put on the green roof, charge you this much, pocket the difference. And so across the whole city with the way they've set up their fees. And so, that's an exciting opportunity to try to bring in the engineers, the landscape architects, the people who are actually creating and building, rain barrel and installing cisterns and so forth, because all of a sudden, if you set up that way, you're sort of shifting to bringing other investment money into the city and to help create these programs. So I think that's one thing we're interested in, is how do you align a fee and credit system where you can have them in creating opportunities for private investment. Integrated planning, I think, is a critical one, and Nancy touched on it through the new integrated permitting program, but I think even at the local level, it's sort of the idea. I have a friend who called it just add water. And we've seen the city of Bremerton, Washington, when they did their capital improvement program, which was driven by their transportation plan, they went ahead and said, oh, well, let's look at stormwater at the same time. And so they added in the stormwater retrofits at the same time, and looked at the low impact development approaches, and it ended up being overall, a very cost-effective plan that they're going to put in. And so any opportunities to really integrate that sort of planning at the city level, when you have all these people coming together and trying to do planning, it seems really smart, because once you already have your long-term plans and the road people are doing one thing, it is hard to go back and try to change it. The retrofits are more expensive, and so when those plans are going forward, just adding water and thinking about the green infrastructure practices makes a lot of sense. And I think that also goes to, what Nancy was saying, that, if you're doing it with transportation, then what transportation money is available to actually come in and then pay for those. And transportation money is available for stormwater. It just hasn't been used that way. So I think there's some opportunities there. So two last things. I know I'm talking for a long time, but the equity issue, and I think you were sort of referring to this a bit of, because the regulatory system doesn't capture everyone who is contributing to stormwater, how do you get around that? And it's hard, especially if you have people outside your boundaries. And I think we've seen a lot of places move towards these more on-site retention standards, trying to say, you have to keep a certain amount and setting the bar pretty high on how much water you keep on site, but then looking and saying, well, if you can't do it because we don't want to deter growth, you can pay into a fee or you can buy a credit from someone else, which then sets up a whole sort of market system. Washington, D.C. is sort of starting this sort of program. They're saying that for new projects, you have to keep 1.2 inches on site. Redevelopment has to keep 0.8 inches on site. The developers have to hit 50% of that. The next 50%, if they can't hit it, they can pay into a fee that the district uses to provide services, or they can buy a credit if someone else wants to keep way more water on site within that service area. So I think some of the sort of payment systems are very interesting as they're developing, providing both incentive and sort of a flexibility in there that we may not have seen before. And so that's sort of a creative approach that I flagged for you all because it's driven by the permit obligations, but trying to provide more flexibility and incentive for people to do it in ways that work for them, and making sure that we're still promoting the economic development in that area where there's a high demand for it. And finally, I'll just say one idea that we are working with Grand Rapids. Is Grand Rapids here? I didn't see.
Michigan?
Yeah.
Well, they were here in the beginning.
Okay. So anyway, we worked with the city of Grand Rapids, and the idea, you all are familiar with the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard. So we said, well, could you do a green infrastructure portfolio standard, just as a way of thinking about, okay, over time, could we use more green infrastructure to manage the city and time? So we have a grant from Region 5 and been working with Grand Rapids and Milwaukee to try, and the city, the folks in the city, to look at, well, how would this work? What are the metrics? Where are the opportunities you have? And it sort of does get to the just add water idea of anytime the city makes a decision, what other thing can you retrofit with green infrastructure to make the stormwater system and clean water work better? So again, another sort of innovative idea that really it would be at a city level, and so it's another sort of exciting opportunity to work at that level to try to increase the way and change the way we manage water and really manage our cities. So those are some of the things that we've seen across the country that we're excited about. Some we're working on, some we're just sort of observing with interest to see how they turn out. And I think just this whole area of green infrastructure is really rapidly expanding. I mean, you've seen the agencies, the states, cities across the country go for it. And so it's an exciting time to be in this area and really to be working at the city level. And I think our vision, we really think of it, our clean water supply program is very much of, vibrant and healthy cities that have clean water. And ideally, I mean, this is really ideal, but you could swim in your hometown river, and you can't always now. But how great would that be? And that's essentially some of the goals of the Clean Water Act, and it's aspirational, but I think we need that kind of vision, and creating it and then getting there will take a lot of different strategies, and I think this is a really important one. And the City River Arch discussion last night kind of showed how reconnecting people to their rivers can help. And there was a very green infrastructure sort of presentation, a lot of good pictures there. I like those. So I'm going to leave it there. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy to chat further if we're not at time. So,
okay.
Thanks.
Are there questions? You did indicate there was going to be a budget, right? I did hear you say that there was going to be a budget of it.
Yeah.
Did I hear you? I think I heard her say that. We just need to make sure that the Mississippi River is included in that budget somehow, some way. Okay.
If there are no mayors, I had a question. I'm really intrigued by what you discussed about Philadelphia. Spent some time in Philadelphia, and I'm trying to visualize the large green areas where they might have put that stormwater. I can't think of where they would have been.
Yeah.
And it brings up sort of the topic of a potential for urban-rural partnerships where you can take water that needs to be filtered or otherwise disposed of in a green way. Would be very, very expensive in an urban setting, but if the logistics permitted, if you could get that to a more rural area before it's just dumped into the river, after what's being done, what can be done economically is done. Have you or anybody else, to your knowledge, looked carefully at the logistics or the practicalities of getting to, some urban-rural partnerships?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the urban-rural partnerships is generally, I mean, there's obviously a lot of work going on right now in terms of incipient water quality trading programs. So looking at, how a wastewater treatment plant might pay a farmer to reduce nutrients through buffer zones or other sort of nutrient management techniques to hit water quality compliance. When there's a lot of issues in terms of implementation that get right down into the details very, very quickly, and so I think why most of those are pilot programs, and a lot of the existing trading programs haven't really been used that much so far.
I mean, are the costs of transportation are they simply prohibitive?
Well, I think it's just it's an issue of monitoring and measuring and setting the targets, and so those sort of issues. But I think in terms of the stormwater issues, when you're looking at volume-based controls, like we're seeing in DC and a couple other places, there is starting to be some volume-based trading on a sort of either city or sub-watershed level. I haven't seen any volume-based trading at the larger scale, and I think that actually becomes super complicated in terms of the hydrologic modeling and knowing where the peak flows would be and stuff. I haven't heard of that, but yeah. But I think the issue of cities having different sort of layouts, so certainly Detroit has a lot of room to do green infrastructure, and Cleveland is looking at their vacant lot studies, vacant lot availability as part of their CSO plan, whereas places like Philadelphia and New York are really looking at retrofits, green roofs, green alleys, expanding parks where they can, and so having to be even more sort of creative what they do. So it'll vary depending on the land use within the city.
Okay. If there are no other questions?
I had a question,
Yes.
Mayor. Katherine, how does your organization have a position on the Wave 4 Act?
On the what?
The Wave 4 Act? The proposals to change the Inland Waterway Trust Fund cost sharing.
I don't have any. I don't work on that one, so I can't answer that one. Sorry. Yeah.
Just curious. We heard about that yesterday.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
If there are no other questions, then I believe it is time for Mayor Slade to speak with us and
Thank you so much for
conclude.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Katherine.